I believe that freedom is essential. And not just because I prefer it, but because in order to attract immigrants, what are they offering the immigrants? Freedom. Okay. In order to make the inventions needed to survive on Mars, freedom. In order to make the inventions that can be licensed on Earth to bring income to the Martian colony so they can pay for those things they still do need to import, freedom. In one sense or another, it's going to have freedom.
Robert Zubrin, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so you've dedicated a huge chunk of your life to space and human expansion, and in a way it makes sense because things on Earth can seem so bleak sometimes that it's like, why not focus on going other places that aren't here? And like sometimes you just look at everything around that's going on and you're like, it kind of looks like a dumpster fire sometimes. But before we get into the specifics of what you're doing today and what you've done over the past few decades, I wanted to ask you, what drew you to space initially? Like, were you a kid when you first felt that drive? Like, what was that first memory or idea that popped into your head?
Well, it was Sputnik.
Mm.
I was 5 when Sputnik flew, and I was already reading science fiction. And while to the adults, Sputnik may have been terrifying, to me it was exhilarating. I thought it was great. Because what it meant was all these stories about space travel that I was reading were going to be true. So I wanted to be part of it, and just tore into it. And my parents encouraged my interest. My father got me a telescope. I did drawings of the moon through the eyepiece, got into rocketry and stuff like that, and learned all the science I could. And, and this is what was happening. It was in 4th grade class. I saw Kennedy's speech giving us to go to the moon. And growing up in the 60s, we were doing something new in space every month, orbiting the Earth, the 2 people orbiting the Earth, spacewalks, rendezvous, and then Apollo itself, and first probes to Mars and Venus, Mariner. So there I was.
So when you mentioned the terrifying aspect of Sputnik, was that something that you picked up on when you were a kid? Like, did you feel fear from the adults? Was that something you learned later on?
No, I personally, no. To me as a child, Sputnik was great. Laika, the space dog, and Belka and Strelka, the space dogs. This was great stuff. And no,
because adults weren't exactly sure, right?
No, to me they were not scary events, and to me, my family wasn't particularly anti-Soviet. My father had been in the war, and the Russians had been our allies. I was aware of the situation had changed, but no, I didn't feel fear from the Soviets. I thought it was great that we were going to space, and they were going to space, we were going to space. I wanted us to do more in space than them, but no, I don't recall fear of Russian space accomplishments. I felt some irritation when they beat us to some accomplishment that we were not doing more. We should be doing more, but I didn't feel fear.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about because that was that was long before my time. But I can only imagine if I was an adult during that launch, and you're like we're in the middle of conflict, and you're not really sure what's going up into the sky? Like, wasn't there a lot of speculation about like, is this a weapon? Like, is this going to be used to spy on people? Like, people weren't exactly sure of the full
Well,
like scope of Sputnik.
okay, look. Okay,
And I apologize for
with
my ignorance.
official circles, they must have felt all those things. But if you're
Mm,
asking what me as a boy
yeah.
was feeling, the only time I felt fear from the Russian was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was 10. Um, and this thing was for real. This was the immediate threat of nuclear war. But I didn't associate the Russian space program with that in particular. The and No, and in fact, in the '60s, uh, one of the bright spots in the Cold War was the space programs. Um, Now, once again, people in officialdom may have felt otherwise, but to many people, it was kind of like a sport, um, in which you could respect the accomplishments of the other. And I have to tell you, I was actually uh, in Leningrad when we landed on the moon. I was a
Oh
chess
wow.
player as a kid, and all the Russians I knew were enthusiastic about the accomplishment. It was like, "You're an American. Do you know the astronauts?" Um,
Yeah.
the Now, of course, they would have been more enthusiastic if it had been Russians, but no.
Mm,
You know, Kennedy had committed us to beat the Russians to the moon in order to astonish the world with what free people could do, and it did. And uh, and it did far more, I think, to make a positive impression for what America represented and ultimately win the Cold War than, for instance, our deployments in Vietnam that were going on at the same time. That this was America the inventor. Those Americans are always inventing something. You know,
mm,
Steamboats and telegraphs and airplanes and rocket ships and the electric light bulbs. I mean, they're the ones, right? And it's still the case, right? And
yeah.
the so you know, there's a number of stereotypes of Americans that people around the world have. Some of them are not complimentary, but one of them that is a positive stereotype is America the innovators, America the inventors. They're always coming up with something. And we sure showed that in the moon program, and it was appreciated.
Yeah, and you mentioned the sport aspect of it, and from what I read about the space race, it does seem like there was this very like Olympic rah rah element to it, where you literally had like the U.S. versus Soviet Union versus whoever, like China, whoever else was putting their
Oh,
hat.
China wasn't a player. No,
China
it
wasn't a
was
play.
basically just us and the
U.S. Soviet
Soviets.
Union. Yeah.
But as far as the civil space program was concerned, the planetary probes and the manned space flights, it was sort of an Olympic spirited competition, and you know, and really, I mean, that's why they have the Olympics, even going all the way back to ancient Greece. It was to create that feeling, and and it does to some extent. Not sufficient to prevent countries from going to war over what they consider their vital interests, unfortunately, but it does, at least to some degree, reinforce a sense of common humanity between different nations.
Yeah, and like the Olympics, it was this display of the potential of human progress, like the absolute epitome of what can happen if an entire country works together.
Right. Um, and, you know, not at that time, but since that time, I've had the opportunity to read some Soviet science fiction from the 1960s. And it actually had a fair amount in common with American science fiction of the 1960s. We're going to Mars, we're going to build cities on Mars, there's endless possibilities. And the sense that anything is possible.
Do you think we should bring back that Olympic element to like the current race to Mars? Because from like the media perspective, it seems like it's a very like private versus public corporation race. Like almost like is someone like Elon Musk gonna do it, or is it gonna be like funded by mostly NASA? Like which billionaire is gonna get us to Mars first? That's kind of what it feels like instead of us coming together as a country versus Russia or China or something like that. It feels like that
Well,
Olympic spirit is gone a little bit.
unfortunately, there isn't a race to Mars going on right now. I mean, there was a race to the moon, and there really was. But the Russians are pretty much out of the game. The Chinese are getting into the game, and what they've done with their
Hmm.
landing a rover on Mars on their very first Mars probe is pretty impressive, actually. But there isn't the same sense of a race that there was then, and the the Americans are not racing towards Mars. The Americans have a nominal goal of returning to the moon, but we're not approaching it at all in the same spirit as Apollo. You know, I have a friend who lives in Houston. He went by Johnson Space Center the other day on a Saturday. The parking lot was empty. Parking lot at Johnson Space Center was never empty on a Saturday during Apollo. No.
Mm.
Or at midnight.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Okay. So this moon program that I guess was started by the Trump administration, um, they set a goal of getting back to the moon in 2024, but they didn't actually do anything that would have that as a result. Uh, they basically said it, but when Kennedy said we're going to be on the moon by the end of the decade, it meant something, and it mobilized NASA, and it also pushed out of the way programs that wouldn't contribute to that goal. Um, you know, there were programs in existence in the early X-15 and things, Dinosaur, that ideas for a space station, manned orbiting lab, it was called. These things were all pushed out of the way. We don't need that to get to the moon. People who tried to say, well, you can't do your program till you do my program, were pushed out of the way. Now that's not the case at
Mm.
all. As a critical element of the so-called moon program, we're nominally building a moon orbiting space station, which we do not need, but we're not building a lunar lander, which we do need. And you know, and there's a complete disconnect. There was just a briefing this past week from NASA where they claimed that this Starship is going to land on the moon this year. No, the nothing. They're not even giving Starship the permit to do orbital launches.
Mm.
And before Starship lands on the moon, they'll have to perfect orbital launches, and the Starship plan involves refueling in orbit, in Earth orbit, and then again in lunar orbit with various tanker starships. Total of depending upon how they do it, 10 to 14 launches to do one lunar mission. There's a whole mastery of operations that would be required to pull that off, and while SpaceX may want to move fast, the government is not letting them move fast.
Mm. Do you think it's good to have that government governor on the movement, like the velocity of the SpaceX mission? Like what's the ideal cooperation between a corporation like SpaceX and a corporate like a public government funded corporation like NASA? Like what should be the ideal kind of meshing to get
Well,
us to
the
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 Mars?
okay okay the if it's going to be funded by the government, then NASA should choose the goal. Then it should go to the private industry and say, here's the goal. How would you do it? Or what part can you play to help us do it? In other words,
Mm.
what capabilities do you offer? And shop for the most capability for the money. And But in other words, the free market's a powerful thing if people are free to supply whatever they want, and the buyer is free to buy on the basis of rationality. A lot of the government's purchasing decisions are not being dictated by rationality, but by constituency pressure. We want
Mm.
you to buy this rocket because it's in our district, as opposed to because it offers the most launch capability for the money. Okay, things like that. So the free market requires both free sellers and free customers. So now, SpaceX is, well, trying to operate within a dynamic that is partially that, but also is partially the government making purchasing decisions in order to fund particular programs, because otherwise the constituents of various congressmen would be upset.
Mm.
But also, I mean, NASA makes some of its purchasing decisions based on purpose-driven decisions, and others of its purchasing decisions are based on vendor-driven decisions. And now, I think there is somewhat of a lack of vision in NASA at the higher levels. At the middle and lower levels, there's plenty of people who join NASA who, in order to storm heaven, but there's also some that joined because they needed a job and they got a job there. But there's no real political leadership to the space program right now. I mean, the nation's political leadership is vastly inferior today to what it was in the 60s. Both in terms of the individuals that you could point to, but also in terms of how the parties act. The people who got us to the moon were the same people or the younger brothers of the people that won World War II. And they knew how to do big things. They knew how to work together to do big things. They defeated the Nazis. They stopped Soviet expansionism. They did atoms for peace. They did the interstate highway system. They, and they did Apollo. And there was a lot of bipartisanship. I mean, yeah, rivalry for sure, but really in a way that there isn't. And there were also, look, John F. Kennedy was a torpedo boat captain. He knew that sometimes you have to do things that involve risk. Okay. NASA, we can't go to Mars until we know it's safe. Do you think we knew it was safe when we went to the moon? I mean, really? Yes, if safety comes first, you don't fly, period. The mission has to come first. And you do it as safely as you can, but you do the mission. So you take Mars. Really, from a technical point of view, we are much closer today to being able to send people to Mars than we were able to send people to the moon in 1961 when Kennedy announced the program. And we were there 8 years later. Today, you talk to NASA, Mars, that's for 20 years now. That's for this. Now, Musk is a different animal, and he's controversial, and as a person, I give him mixed reviews, but there are some very positive things about him. He is very driven to accomplish things. Okay. Now, this is a strength, it's a weakness. He wants eternal glory for doing great deeds, and sometimes that doesn't look good. But sometimes it does. And of course, the two notable accomplishments of both SpaceX and Tesla are driven by that drive. Now, he wants to make humanity interplanetary, and he's willing to take chances to do it. And so he's created this Starship with the idea of enabling not only the human missions to Mars, but the human settlement of Mars. And he set a high bar, and he's willing to take chances. He's willing to fail. As you can see, his general approach to development is build lots of the rockets, launch the first one, crash it, try to figure out what went wrong, launch the next one, fix what made that one crash, and by about the fifth time it works. And you know, and there it is. Whereas NASA took basically 30 years from the beginning of the what is SLS program before they launched it.
Yeah, Musk, he definitely, like you said, he likes to move fast and break shit. And if you're gonna bring us to a place where we haven't been before, it seems like you need someone with more of a Musk mentality than someone like the bureaucracy, or someone who's worried about political shifting and how they're going to be viewed in the public light. Like he definitely loves being out there and being on Twitter and you know, shooting shit out into the Twitter ethosphere and getting reactions and but like you can't argue with what he's done when you take a step back. And even though his day-to-day might look a little bit reckless, he's accomplished a lot of things, like Tesla, like SpaceX, like doing things with rockets that we never thought were possible for a much cheaper cost. And if you start with someone that comes from the bureaucracy and they're so like carefully calculated and they're not really willing to take a risk, you're not going to find out what your limits are. And the way Musk is doing it, like breaking past the limits without risking human life, I feel like is the way that you have to approach the first mission, rather than like steadily approach the line and almost like whisper to it and be like, what should we do now? Like Musk is just like fucking like blazing full speed ahead and
Well,
trying to
it's
figure it
also
out.
other things. Once again, he's very purpose driven. The and well, I'll even bring up I know Musk, and so one point of technical disagreement between me and Musk, where I said they should build a mini Starship that could be launched as the upper stage of the Falcon 9, in addition to the big Starship. And the idea is if you had that, first of all, that system in itself would be a fully reusable medium lift system, great utility, commercial utility, and it could be developed very fast because they already have the lower stage, and so forth, and all the permissions to launch, that kind of thing. And furthermore, in terms of doing a human Mars mission, it would be superior to using the big Starship because you could launch one of those mini Starships fully fueled to orbit in the big Starship and just send it off to Mars. And since it's only 1/5 the size of the big Starship, it'd be much easier to refuel to send back. So, but Musk says, but I only want to develop one flight system. Okay, tell me why I need that. And I say, well, it would reduce the amount of propellant you need to make on Mars by a factor of 5, which means the amount of power you need on Mars by a factor of 5, and so forth. And he says, but if I did it that way, I would have to develop 2 flight systems. So there's a trade. Do you need a bigger power system, or do you need a smaller flight? In other words, you need something extra either way. Either a bigger propellant making production capacity on Mars, or a second flight system. That's the trade. But his basic approach is, tell me why I need it. Whereas with NASA, if you say to them, you don't need a lunar orbiting space station to do a lunar mission, they say things like, well, it might come in handy. That is, for them, it's proof to me that I'll never need it, as opposed to Musk, it's proof to me that I do need it. And so they will do activities in other words, Musk spends money to do things. They do things in order to spend money.
Yeah.
Musk is not interested in doing things in order to spend money. Because, first of all, a lot of it is his money. And second of all, that's not the way to get something done fast.
Yeah, that's something I didn't realize until I got older and started being more exposed to the political system, is that a large part of the job is just figuring out how to spend dollars and how to spend the budget, and not necessarily spend it in the most efficient way possible. And you could argue that most of the time it's not spent in the most efficient or effective way possible. Whereas, with Musk, he's not trying to like fill his quota of dollars spending that quarter. He's trying to spend it on something that's going to work. Like you said, prove it to me, tell me why I need this. Which seems like a much better approach. Like, why is this indispensable? And if you can make your case, then we'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to take a step back a little bit before we get into more specifics of Musk's the Starship plan versus the Mars Direct plan that you talk about in the case for Mars. Why Mars? Like, what makes Mars the mother lode of human expansion?
Well, okay, first of all, in the short term, Mars is where the science is, and it's where the challenge is. Okay. I mean, Mars is the Rosetta Stone for letting us know the truth about the potential prevalence and diversity of life in the universe, because the early Mars was similar to the early Earth in essentials. And if life could evolve in that environment on Earth, and if those steps were high probability, then they should equally have occurred on Mars, although maybe not in precisely the same way, which means that you could have very diverse types of life on Mars. In other words, not necessarily using DNA and RNA, for example, for the information system, but some other genetic alphabet, just like everybody needs an alphabet, but there's quite a variety of alphabets on Earth that all serve the same function. But in the longer run, precisely because it has the materials needed to support life, it also has the materials needed to support civilization in a way, for instance, that the moon does not. And if we can go to Mars and learn how to turn those materials into resources, then we can settle Mars. We can make Mars habitable for us. In other words, an environment is habitable for you when the materials that are there are resources for you. Okay, and this is a function of your technology. I mean, also the materials have to be there. But, if you're stranded in the mountains and there's a lake, are the fish in the lake a resource for you? Well, if you know how to create fishing gear and fish, then they are. If they're not, if you don't have that skill, then they're not. Of course, if they're not there, they're not either. But both of those things are required. Now, on Mars, the materials are there. And if we develop the ingenuity, then all of a sudden it's a resource-rich environment, just like that mountain lake filled with fish is a resource-rich environment for the person who's stranded there, provided they bring the right technology to the problem. And this is the case with Mars. But if there's no lake, and there's no lake on the moon, as it were, that is, there's some water in permanently shadowed craters near the lunar South Pole, but on Mars you've got continent-sized regions that are 60% water by weight in the soil. You have massive glaciers bigger than the American Great Lakes, as far south as 38 degrees north, which is the latitude of San Francisco. So Mars has got water in a serious way. Mars has got carbon. It's carbon dioxide dominated atmosphere. We are carbon-based life forms. Everything we are and everything we eat is made of carbon. A lot of the materials, carbon, whether it's natural fabric or artificial fabric, it's carbon. And even things that aren't carbon are made with carbon, like steel, aluminum. Frankly, there's carbon involved in all these processes, and there's no carbon on the moon. Lots of carbon on Mars, everywhere on Mars. There's nitrogen on Mars, no nitrogen on the moon. These are the elements of life. Okay, then we get into the elements of industry, and the moon only has about half of them, and Mars has got all of them. And Mars has had a complex geological history, which is necessary for creating mineral ore. since the earliest civilizations, people have used copper. Even Copper Age, Bronze Age were the first two ages of metal use on Earth. Well, guess what? Copper is only 60 parts per million in the Earth's crust. Excuse me. So how were ancient Egyptians able to use it? Well, because there's natural processes that concentrate it into either very concentrated copper sulfates, things like that, or even metallic copper. Some American Indians actually used natural metallic copper formed by nature. Well, the moon's all trash rock. On Moon, if there's 60 parts per million on the moon, it's just scattered around like it's 60 parts per million. It's not brought together by anything. But Mars has had volcanic processes and the water, hydrologic processes and hydrothermal processes, and possibly even biological processes that have been involved in concentrating mineral ores on Earth. So it's likely to be mineral ore on Mars and not on the moon. So you got ore, you've got the elements. You also have a 24-hour day as opposed to 2 weeks of light, 2 weeks of dark, which is what you got on the moon. You've got, gravity that's a bit more like Earth, 1/3 instead of 1/6. Mars it has an atmosphere which, as thin as it is thick enough to block out solar flares. So you could actually put thin-walled greenhouses on the Martian surface and grow plants in them and not have them killed by solar flares. You couldn't do that on the moon. So in all these ways, the Mars is a much more promising location for settlement than the moon. The analogy I use is Mars compares to the moon in the coming age of space settlement as North America compared to Greenland in the earlier European age of maritime exploration and settlement. Greenland's closer to Europe. Europeans reached it first. The Vikings reached it about 1,000 years ago. But it was just too impoverished an environment to really create a civilization. Some outposts, yes, but not a vibrant new civilization in the way that the Americas offered. So that's how it is. Mars is the new world.
The analogy that popped into my head when you were speaking is that the moon is like the trashy girl who's only good for a one-night stand, and Mars is like she has all the elements for a fulfilling, sustainable relationship. You just got to figure out a way, how to get in there.
Okay, well, that's another way of putting it.
But North America works too. That's just coming from my dirty, disgusting mind.
Okay.
So in terms of the plan to get there, you alluded to Musk's Starship plan that you've described as D-Day compared to your strategy, which is the Mars Direct plan. So I wanted to ask you first, how are your plans similar, you and Musk? What's similar about it? And then we'll get into the differences.
All right. Well, obviously, the Mars Direct plan came first. And it was a major break with the earlier paradigm, which is the von Braun paradigm. Okay, the von Braun paradigm, which is the first paradigm, is on-orbit assembly of huge interplanetary spaceships that go from Earth to Mars and back with all the propellant coming from Earth, park them in Mars orbit, send down little landing craft to go down, and usually for a comparatively brief stay, flags and footprints, go back up and fly the thing back. Okay, it's maximum cost, minimum capability. The Mars Direct plan involves the following elements: no on-orbit assembly, direct launch to Mars, direct return from Mars using propellant made on Mars. Von Braun does not use propellant made on Mars. That's why he needs all that other stuff. Okay, we do long duration stays on Mars starting on the first mission. No on-orbit assembly, no advanced propulsion, but in situ resources, use of Martian resources starting on the first mission, long duration stays on Mars starting on the first mission. So that's the Mars Direct paradigm, and all that was embraced by Musk, including the particular propellant combination that I advocated, which is methane oxygen, as the easiest high-performance propellant combination to make on Mars.
And so that would be for the return flight that you make
yes.
Okay.
Right. And that's why Starship uses methane oxygen as its propellant. So it's designed to use propellant that can be made on Mars. It's also
you
a
got to get
good
back.
propellant. Okay. Now, what are some of the things that are different? Okay. First of all, the concept of Mars Direct was conceived in the context of an exploration program that would evolve towards settlement.
Okay.
So the vehicles are smaller. We send an Earth return vehicle to Mars with no one in it first. It makes its propellant. Then we send the crew out to Mars in a Habitat spacecraft launched one way. The Habitat stays behind on Mars. They use it as their house on Mars. And then when they get time to go home, they get in their Earth return vehicle, they fly back, leave the Habitat behind on Mars. Each time you do this, you add another Habitat to the base. Okay. Now, the idea was we could land these habitats. The first 5 or 10 missions would go to diverse locations to explore lots of places. And then after we were satisfied that one particular place was the best place to build a major base, we would just start landing lots of habitats there.
So you shoot a lot of darts, and then you figure out which one would be the best for like an early colony, like a first colonization effort.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think before you choose where you want to live, you ought to check out a number of places.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
People do that on Earth. No one just goes to like a city blind and is like, I'm going to move here without checking it out. Yeah.
Right. Okay, check it out. The Musk plan, he has this rather large ship. Okay, and instead of, in the Mars Direct, we used a heavy lift vehicle and we would fire off to Mars these payloads, either the Earth return vehicle or the HAB modules. Okay, he takes his launch vehicle itself, refuels it on orbit, or the upper stage of it anyway, and sends it to Mars, and then refuels that on Mars to come back. So the same ship that goes out comes back, and it's rather large. And it needs about 7 or 8 times the amount of propellant to come back from Mars as the Mars Direct Earth return vehicle does. So instead of needing 100 kilowatts on Mars to make the propellant, he needs a megawatt. Now you say, okay, look, and I guess this is where the disagreement with Musk comes in, where I wanted to shoot off a mini Starship to Mars, which would be kind of like the Earth return vehicle, except it's a single stage vehicle that could go there and back. Okay. So sort of a compromise between the Starship architecture and the Mars Direct architecture. It doesn't make sense to use something as big as a Starship as a Mars Earth return vehicle. Now, if you were flying them one way to Mars and leaving them on Mars, there's some merit to that. You land a Starship on Mars and leave it there, you got an apartment house on Mars. Okay. But it takes an awful lot of propellant to move that thing back. And if you're doing colonization, first of all, the amount of people it moves are much larger than you need for an exploration crew. Okay. If you're doing colonization, then yes, you want to move a lot of people to Mars. But how many are you moving back? Okay. Now, I suppose you could make the argument that you land 10 Starships one way to Mars and every once in a while send one back. Like that, but basically, the Starship, his notion was he was going to fly these things round trip. And use them to deliver cargoes to Mars, and then fly them back. And I basically feel that using it as an ascent vehicle is suboptimal. Now,
What does ascent vehicle mean? Is that just like for the
take ascent, take
okay,
off, and descent going down,
got
ascent
it,
going up.
got it.
Okay, so but one-way transport to Mars, it's thinkable, especially if you're once again doing colonization. Well, obviously, colonization involves one-way transport, um, whereas exploration is round-trip transport, and with smaller numbers of people involved. The so now, of course, if you phase this, and that's how I would do it. In other words, if you say, okay, I want to be fully reusable, and Musk insists on that, you go with mini starships first to explore a lot of places. Then you start sending big starships one way, as basically, as I say, landing apartment buildings on Mars. And still could use the mini starships for return trips every now and then. Now, the other thing is, however, the scenario that Musk laid out, for instance, in his initial Guadalajara talk in 2016, where he first presented Starship publicly, and in a variety of talks since then, is, okay, we're going to send 1,000 of them a year from Earth to Mars, moving 100,000 people a year in order to get 1 million people on Mars in 10 years.
Okay.
Now,
Wow.
I don't think that is how. Okay, and that's what I've compared to the Normandy landing. Okay.
So he's trying to colonize from launch one, like start that colonization effort with the exploration, whereas Mars Direct is more, like you said, explore first, go to a bunch of different spots, and then once you do some recon, then you decide on, okay, where are we going to put the first colony?
Then you build a base.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, so you go from a situation where you have 5 or 10 people on Mars to a situation where you have 100 people on Mars. Now, why do you want 100 people or 300 people or something on Mars? Well, because in addition to continuing exploration, they could be doing technology development. They could be figuring out how to make steel on Mars, how to make glass on Mars, how to build greenhouses on Mars, how to grow plants in quantity on Mars. In other words, first is people who are just exploring. Then there's people who are basically doing engineering development to figure out how to turn a larger variety of Martian materials into resources. With Mars Direct, we use the most obvious resource, the carbon dioxide in the water, to make fuel and oxygen. But civilization requires more than fuel and oxygen. It requires all sorts of stuff. And so if we're going to support large numbers of people on Mars, while we can import certain things that are very high value for their weight, like this, you don't want to import steel to Mars. You don't want to import glass to Mars. You don't want to import food to Mars. Okay, this thing has a value about $1,000 a pound. Okay, potatoes have a value of a couple of dollars a pound. You don't want to transport things that cost a couple of dollars a pound across interplanetary space. But you can make them on Mars. They are relatively simpler in their creation. That's one of the reasons why they're cheap, in fact. But we need a lot of them to build colonies and so forth. So there'd be a certain phase in which we have not tens of people, but hundreds of people on Mars while we develop this craft. Now, once this is developed, then you can start bringing in more people. Okay. And now you know how to create farms on Mars, but now you actually have to create them. Okay. You don't send 1 million people to Mars before you've built farms that can support 1 million people on Mars. Okay.
So with Musk's plan, the resources would be going, back and forth pretty rapidly. There would be colonization way before Mars was ever self-sustaining or able to support itself.
I don't think he's thought it through. Okay. He's focused on creating a transportation system, which of course is vital. But if one looks at, we first established some fairly small settlements in America of hundreds of people at Jamestown and Plymouth and so forth. And, even, okay, to go 100 years after Jamestown, 1709 or so, or 1720, Benjamin Franklin shows up in Philadelphia. Okay, if you've read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, shows up in Philadelphia after scramming from Boston. He's a young man. Philadelphia's a big city, population 6,000. So that's how many people were living in Philadelphia 100 years into the colonization of America. Boston was a little bigger at that time, more like 20,000. New York was smaller.
So 6,000 was like a poppin' city back in the 18th century. That was like...
Well, no, I mean, London was 600,000. But if we're talking about...
For North America.
North America, if we're talking 100 years into the colonization, you've got the biggest cities are order of 10,000 people. Okay? Now, there's a significant rural population, too. Okay? But go forward at the time of the American Revolution. New York City had a population of 23,000 people. Okay? Philadelphia had 50,000. Boston, I don't know, around 30,000 or so. Okay? These were the biggest cities. Now, once again, significant rural population. This was not an urban society, and Mars is going to be an urban society. Mars is going to be a society of cities. But these cities initially can be fairly small. Now, think about a city of 10,000 people for a minute, okay? Now, we don't really think in these terms. But if you have 10,000 people, and the most important Martian cities, the ones that actually grow, will be ones where people have children, okay? You can have certain bases established on Mars where people don't have any children or many children, but those are not going to be the ones that set the pattern for future Martian civilization. The ones, for whatever reason, will be ones which are settled by people who want to have families. Okay? So let's say if you have a demographic like that, you have maybe 15, 20% of the population are under 18 years old. So let's say it's 10,000 people, 15%, that's 1,500 kids. Okay? Divide that by 12 or so, that's about 120 kids per grade. Okay? So could have, an elementary school, a middle school, a high school, and you'd have 4 or 5 classes of each grade. Classrooms.
Martian
right?
High.
You've got real schools, okay? You've got, with 10,000 people, you have people who know how to fix machines and people who know how to do programming, and you've got nurses and doctors, and you have you probably have someone with all the principal skills that are needed with a population of 10,000.
And when you have Martian children, you're also bringing in a population that is just framing the world in terms of the problems that exist on Mars and not coming with the baggage of thinking like what is possible on Earth. So I imagine that also spurs a lot of innovation and people are using different technology. They probably discover Martian drugs, like who knows, like the psychedelic, like just like this whole ecosystem is going to start of a definitive Mars culture, because that's what young people do. They try to break away, they rebel against adults in some form, and then they start to form their own thing, and that's going to be like uniquely Martian technologically and socially.
But if you think about this, the Musk plan of shipping 1 million people to Mars in 10 years, it's assuming you're building a metropolis. Okay? I think what will actually happen, once we understand how to turn the materials on Mars into resources so Mars becomes settleable in principle, you'll have different groups going to Mars. establishing towns on Mars in this scale, 10,000, 20,000, 5,000. Okay. And now the question is, which ones are going to grow? Okay. And this will be a function of the choices that those people make. The ones that'll grow will be the ones that are the most attractive to immigrants, for example. Okay. So I don't think that a tyranny will grow on Mars. Someone could establish a tyrannical colony, but it will be stillborn. Okay.
Yeah, people have options.
Who would want to move there? Okay. So these things will be of peripheral interest to the future. So some will grow. So there's two ways they can grow: immigrants and children. And the ones that grow the most will be the ones that do both of those. And, you know, in the 16 and 1700s, France had 4 times the population of Britain. Yet, by 1750, when it came down to this final struggle for North America, there were 2 million English-speaking people in North America and 50,000 French. And one of the reasons, well, the principal reason actually, is that English women moved to North America and French women did not. And the reason why English women moved to North America and French women did not is because the English colonies were set up as societies with churches and schools and all this kind of stuff. They were places where you would go, and now we can have some land and raise a family and do all this, okay, and have a community. Whereas the French were set up as commercial outposts run by corporations to conduct the fur trade. So the French men went, but the women didn't, for the most part.
Yeah,
and so
the men follow the women, and the women have babies. Like no one wants to go to a city. Like even if you show up at a party and there's a bunch of guys there, the first thing people start asking is like, "Where are the girls?" Like there are no girls in here. So I imagine if you go to a Martian city and it's just like a bunch of dudes, people are gonna be like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna go to the Martian City Block 2 down the road."
Well, there is that, but also, frankly, if you don't have women, you don't have children, and that's for sure. And so, these are some of the elements. And I'm actually working on a book right now called New World: What Will We Create on Mars? And it looks at these sorts of issues, and not so much from the point of view of how I would design the social system, but from the point of view of what social system is likely to prevail. Okay, because in other words, this thing is going to be decided by natural selection. Now, people like me, people among the Mars colonists, will take their best guess as to what's likely to be successful. And, I think we're going to see a variety of social systems ranging from, social democratic to libertarian and maybe other kinds of things that are not on our political spectrum at all right now. But the decision is going to be made by what works, what draws the most immigrants, what creates the most prosperity. I personally believe, and I make arguments for it in the book, that freedom is essential. And not just because I prefer it, but because in order to attract immigrants, in other words, it's going to have, what are they offering the immigrants? Freedom. Okay. In order to make the inventions needed to survive on Mars, freedom. In order to make the inventions that can be licensed on Earth to bring income to the Martian colony so they can pay for those things they still do need to import, freedom. Okay. So I think this is going to be an essential element. Now, there are people on Earth today who have very different ideas on what freedom is. Okay. There are people who say freedom requires government provided health care because health care is a right. There are people who say freedom requires no government. The Because government restricts freedom. Now, but in one sense or another, it's going to have freedom.
Yeah, and if you look at freedom outside of the political spectrum, freedom is the ability to make your own choices and take on your own risks, provided that you're not directly harming your neighbors. So if a bunch of people get together and they decide that they want to take the risk of going on a mission to Mars or becoming part of the first colony of Mars, then you're also going to attract people, I imagine, who value that same sort of freedom. So you'll have
Right.
a colony full of like-minded people who are okay with like the baseline of that colony, no matter what the demographic is, like age, race, religion, whatever. That's also going to be interesting, like seeing what form religion takes on Mars. Like that could be a
Well,
whole like
yes.
side tangent. But like the base thing that everyone will have is that everyone on that colony is okay with the level of risk of leaving Earth, and that's like such a huge unifying factor and motivating factor.
Well, there is that. That's true. But it's interesting you brought up the concept of religion. Now, I happen not to be a practicer of organized religion. But in thinking about a Mars colony, there's a lot of arguments as to why a colony that has solid religious beliefs in which most people take part in organized religion might be more successful than
Mm.
one that doesn't. I mean, in one way or another, colony's going to have freedom, but it's also going to have a kind of solidarity. And of course, one way that is generated in many societies is through religion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But and anthropologists, have looked at this from just an anthropological perspective, and they look at the function of religion in tribal societies and developed societies and other societies, and it fulfills this sort of function. And even things like dancing, where people
Mm.
move together in a rhythmic way, creates a sense of solidarity.
Have you
And
have you read *Sapiens* by Yuval
yes,
Harari?
I have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the first time I heard about religion as a unifying source, like beyond the obvious of people coming together and practicing in a physical place and sharing the same values. Like religion does serve, and like I'm a former practicing Catholic. Like I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school and kind of got away from it. So I mean, this is gonna offend some people that are listening, but that's fine. Like religion is a form of fiction that can be used to unify people under a story. And then when you have a certain amount of people, like once you surpass like 150 people or whatever it is, things start to get out of whack. So you need an element to unify the people and their actions, and then a fictional story, a fictional just like a reason of being is a great way to do that, like giving people some sort of higher power to unify under.
Well, yeah. Well, look. Okay. Myths are necessary to unify a society. And now myths can be completely false. They can be completely true. General, they're somewhere in between. Okay. Uh, by myth here, I don't mean that it's a lie. I simply mean that it's a story
Mm.
that is told to unify. And for example, what is the most solemn holiday celebrated in America? I think it's Thanksgiving. Christmas is very commercialized.
What is solemn? Solemn is like peaceful, sacred holiday.
Sacred.
Sacred. Okay.
There's a sense of
Yeah.
the sacred in it. There's a sense people travel across the country to be with their families on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and
Right?
Thanksgiving pierces the veil of religion. People come together regardless of their religious backgrounds. It's just like a
Right.
thing people do.
But it is almost in a way, for at least many people, more religious than overtly religious holidays. Um, the and because I'll tell you what it is. It's the American creation story. That's what's being celebrated at Thanksgiving. Okay, it's our creation story. Okay, and while it's not completely accurate,
Yeah.
it's a more believable creation story
Mm.
than Adam and Eve. And so people can believe it, and celebrate it, and there's this sense of warmth associated with it. Um, but in any case, things like that, or people just all singing the national anthem at the ball game, the singing together. Okay, these are um, and organized sports, which, by the way, is another thing I don't
Yeah.
participate in. Okay, I, I'm not your ideal Martian, or at least you'd probably be some people like me in a Mars colony, but we couldn't be the majority. I'm too individualistic. You need to have the people.
What category would you put yourself in? Because you work in
Well,
science, but you're also
I'm
a
very much
writer.
an I'm a very individualistic person.
You don't think your
But
temperament would be great to have as like an average temperament for a Mars
well,
colonist?
I think you. Well, I personally believe that uh, a society that wants to make progress needs to have some people like me, but we can't have most people like me. It's like an orchestra. You need a lot of violins and clarinets. You only need a couple of oboes and uh, yeah, but you need them.
Yeah.
um, and
They have like the subtleties and the melody and even if they
yeah,
seem like they're not overt in the production, if you take them away, you notice. Like I've watched videos like
right,
that where it's like you take away the bass guitar and then you're like, oh wow, it makes a huge difference. But while it's playing, you don't actually think about the bass that much.
right. Okay, so but anyway, I do think that these two elements, the uh, the element of freedom and the element of solidarity, are going to be the two primary elements that are needed to make it work. And I think also, provided that it's not oppressive, the sense of community um, that comes with solidarity can also be a
Mm,
draw for immigrants, at least certain kinds
mm,
of immigrants who want to be part of that. Um, the but in any case, this is what I'm trying to investigate with this new book called New World, which will be out in about a year.
mm,
Um, the but that's the thing, and but I do believe that precisely because the growth of the colony will be dependent upon finding more attractive ways for people to live together, um, that it will then become an example that will then cause progress elsewhere. Just as, America, okay, the founders, they didn't come up with these ideas that they had 18th century liberalism. these had been generated in Europe. But they could not have been implemented in Europe because there were established ruling institutions there that would stand in the way. But the founders had a chance to give them a try, and they called it a noble experiment. And it worked well enough that millions of people came here to be part of it, and it became an example. So, for instance, now democracy is the standard by which governments around the world are judged. A lot of governments that aren't democracies like to pretend that they are, but nonetheless, the very fact that they have to pretend that they are, and of course, even the ones that are only imperfectly so, including ours. But nevertheless, certainly since World War II, it became clear that basically how good a government was to the extent to which, it didn't match American reality, but at least matched American ideals. So that we judge this is what are advanced societies by to what extent they at least match American ideals, and we judge ourselves by how well we match these ideals.
To go back to the transport, for your plan for Mars Direct, how many people will go on the first manned mission, and who gets to go? Like, who are the ideal people?
Okay, well, if we're talking about Mars Direct, which is an exploration mission, it could be as few as 4.
Really?
Okay.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Now, I wouldn't go with less. I wanted 4 minimum number. It is mathematically the minimum in which you can divide the crew into 2 groups and have no one be alone. But also there's basically 2 essential skills on the mission: mechanic and field scientist. That is, the survival of the mission depends first and foremost on the machinery operating.
Yeah.
So the most valuable player is the person who can fix things. And so I would have, of my 4 people, I would have 2 people chosen for their virtuosity in being able to fix any damn thing. And you meet people like that. People like that. The Mars Society operates these simulated Mars stations in the desert and the Arctic, and hopefully there's a person in every crew that's like that. And very frequently, by the way, it's someone who was raised on a farm.
Interesting. That makes sense, because you have to learn how to basically fix a wide variety of things from a young age. Like, if you're waking up at 5 a.m. every day.
That's not working, and they don't need the manual. They'll never look at the manual. They'll just
and so you need someone who can not only do it with proficiency in a perfect setting, but someone, like you said, who can do it in an Arctic environment, an extremely high pressure environment, a heated, just like your life is literally on the line for you and the other people that you've come with and the mission. So someone that can perform under high pressure and someone that can perform mechanically, and 2 people like that.
Okay. Now, this person, in addition to this, would have to be somewhat sophisticated. But if he or she would probably be an engineer, but once again, an engineer more like an old-time steamship or railroad locomotive engineer who knows the principles of the equipment, but also knows how to fix it. And of course, there's a tremendous variety. And here we're talking even software and stuff like this. And anyway, although with software, they could be helped out by people from Earth, can intervene on those kinds of problems. But electronics and plumbing and every kind, So there's 2 flight mechanics, if you will, and then 2 field scientists. who are, after all, the scientific payload of the mission. We're there to try to detect ancient life, to try to characterize it if we can find it, etc. Now, once again, you don't want a geologist who's helpless around machines, and you don't want flight mechanics who are completely illiterate and couldn't recognize a fossil if they see it. So, in dividing these into these two categories, I'm trying to emphasize the element of skill, but certainly to the extent that people have secondary skills that are also useful, that's great, very desirable. Now, as far as a doctor is concerned, probably if you have a field biologist, you have someone who at one point or another in their career practiced medicine. In other words, their main assignment on the mission isn't being the doctor, because that's a role that only comes into play as a contingency. But and everybody's trained in first aid, maybe even to the level of a paramedic. Everybody knows what to do if somebody has a heart attack.
I feel like you'd want someone with a little bit of a creative side as well, like someone who could be entertaining, like pull out a guitar and play a song or something, or tell a story, just like to pass the time.
Absolutely. In fact, you probably want several. That is the character type you want.
Like a well-rounded man or woman that could just like be
interesting,
be good with the vibe.
Yeah, but no, for instance, I in the Arctic, you want the kind of people you'd like to go on an Arctic expedition with. Okay, yeah, people have a sense of humor, and when things go wrong, they don't get all uptight. They can sort of laugh at the irony of the machine, the all-terrain vehicle failing just when they were about to go out and do something they wanted to do. The can take it in stride. People who, can, get together and tell stories or play cards or do card tricks. We had in the Arctic expedition that I was on in, what was it? 2001. We had a woman in the crew, was a chemist, but she was also a skilled pianist, and we had an electric keyboard in the hab. And she could go and bang out some Mozart on it, and it was great. Now, we had a CD player. We could listen to, the Berlin Symphony Orchestra, but it's just not the same as somebody there who can just bang out some music.
There's something about the live energy. It's like watching a stand-up special on Netflix versus in person, in a packed club. You could feel the sweat.
Right.
People, like, the energy just feeds, the performer feeds off the energy feeds off the audience feeds off the performer. It's like this back and forth of something that can uplift you and make you forget about a dire situation that you're in, like make you forget about like the immense pressure in the moment. It kind of, have you ever read the book Endurance that talks about the Shackleton mission?
Oh yes, I have.
I just finished that recently, and something that stuck out from that book is some of the guys with the sense of humor in the logs, like people that would joke around, and they're literally trapped in the harshest environment on the earth, and you have guys that are joking around about, like losing a foot to frostbite or dying because they can't find any seals because they've ran out of food. Like if anyone wants to read about an incredible mission where, I imagine you'd probably get a lot of the same personality types on an early mission to Mars. The Endurance, about the Shackleton mission, their boat got crushed in the Antarctic.
It's a great book.
Yeah, unbelievable. And it's so much perseverance, so much risk. And the fact that Shackleton was able to guide this mission after being crushed in the Arctic ice or the Antarctic ice and lead those guys back to civilization, without losing a person, I don't know if I've ever heard anything like that. Like, that is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your next question?
Next question. What are the biggest hazards to that may prevent a successful first mission to Mars? Like, what are the things that are likely to, fuck it up, for lack
I
of a
mean,
better
aside
word?
from civilizational collapse on Earth.
Yeah, aside from
Uh,
nuclear, aside from like an unexpected nuke, or a worse pandemic,
yeah,
like
right. Okay, look, it remains the case that simply launch on the rocket involves a certain amount of risk. Okay, it's not routine. It's all okay. Then entry and landing on Mars. We're getting better at that, but still. So you want to exercise all these capabilities. Then there are other things though that I'm less afraid of, like failure of the life support system, because you're going to have a human crew on the scene there to fix it. In other words, in addition to being triply redundant, you're going to have people there who can fix it real time. The Soviet space program, every single Soviet Mars probe failed. Okay.
mm,
But the overwhelming majority, I think all but one of their hundreds of human missions to orbit, succeeded. Why?
wow.
Because they had a cosmonaut there to fix the bulky equipment on their little space stations. Okay. Whereas their Mars probe, it's completely unforgiving on an automated probe. If one little thing is wrong, it's kaput. So I think the human factor is going to be the strongest link in the chain on the mission. I do not believe that radiation is a major hazard. The radiation risks are actually well understood, and the radiation dose you would get to going to Mars and back is moderate scattered across the 2.5 years. It might increase the cancer rate among such crews later in life,
Mm.
but not as much as a smoking habit would. And so I think that one's overdrawn, actually. Provided we have a nuclear power source, dust storms are not a threat. Dust storms are a big threat to if we're restricted to solar power, because they could make solar power ineffective for a period of months, and that would kill the mission. So that's why I believe the mission needs to be nuclear powered on the surface. Not necessarily in flight, but in surface, yes.
So the dust storms, I sorry to cut you off. I just want to say, like, I've seen the time lapses of the dust storms on Mars, and it, literally overtakes the entire planet. So if we had nuclear power, would the actual physical force of the dust storm wouldn't be enough to destroy the labs or
that's
living
one of
facility?
the unrealistic scenes in The Martian.
Okay.
That is, the wind doesn't have that much force because the air is so thin.
Got it.
The main threat from dust storms is simply that they would make solar energy ineffective.
Okay, that makes sense. What about spending? It's 2 years, the first mission, or 2.5 years, something like that.
2.5 years for the round trip. 6 months out, 6 months back, 1.5 years on the surface.
Spending that much time in zero gravity, we kind of know what that does already.
Well,
to
no,
the
you're
human
not
body.
spending that in zero gravity. First of all, in the 1.5 years you're on Mars, you're in gravity. Now, on the way out and the way back, you could either go zero gravity or use artificial gravity, which I recommend in Mars Direct. That, it's all laid out in my book, The Case for Mars. If you spin the spacecraft, you can create artificial gravity. But even if you didn't, 6 months is how long people spend on the space station in zero gravity. People can take it. It does weaken you, however, but it certainly is not a threat to your life.
Yeah, it's an understood risk. Like, we've had people that have done that before.
Many. It's the standard crew rotation on the space station.
So when I was combing around on Reddit and other forums, kind of looking for things that may pose the biggest risk or the biggest hazard to a mission, one of the things that comes up is another pandemic on Earth, but something that's brought on by Martian bacteria. People writing about like something being picked up by the crew and being brought back to Earth. Could that actually happen? Like, is that
No,
something a feasible
it can't.
possibility?
No. Okay. The okay, there can't be any pathogens on Mars because there are no macrofauna or macroflora on Mars. Furthermore, the pathogens that we encounter on Earth, we generally encounter from species that are relatively closely related to us, like other mammals,
Mm,
for example, or at most birds. Uh, you know, I have never heard of people getting a disease from a fish, let alone from a tree. No one I know has ever caught Dutch elm disease. And
mm,
trees, on the other hand, don't get the measles.
mm,
Um, the, so the kinds of organisms that are diseases for trees are not the same kind as the diseases for people. Okay, yes, bats, they're mammals. Okay, rabies, dogs, yes, they're mammals. We can get diseases from them. Okay, mostly we get diseases from other people. Okay, now if you want to know where the largest reservoir of diseases are that could be exposed to the terrestrial environment, they're on Earth. Um, every time somebody goes digs a hole, they bring up sediments from the Middle Ages when there was the Black Death.
mm.
Um,
Good
the
point.
the you know uh, so do we put controls on gardeners to make sure nobody brings back diseases from the
Yeah.
world of the past?
There was
Um,
an article not too long ago about thawing zombie viruses from the Arctic, like taking ice samples and releasing zombie viruses that have been dormant for thousands of years. I don't know uh how true that
well, the
actually
point is,
is.
how much do you want to go crazy with this shit? I mean, are we going to put hazard suits on paleontologists who dig up dinosaur bones? Because yes, the bacteria can survive for millions of years. We have revived bacteria from
Mm,
200 million years ago that were preserved in amber. The uh, but that's the world. There um, there's the world of the past, which is constantly being exposed to the present. And guess what? The world of the present is constantly evolving new
mm.
diseases. Um, and so, um, what can I say? Um, NASA has produced endless volumes of reports about the dangers of possible pathogens from Mars. You're more likely to get a pathogen from the paper of the report.
Mm. Yeah. For the actual, I guess, so I'm in Brooklyn right now, and when people move to a new neighborhood in Manhattan or Brooklyn, Queens, they really like to talk about the vibe or like the look of what their neighborhood is like. That's a big part of what draws people to move to a new place. So if we're talking about the early Mars colonies, what do you anticipate the physical structures to look like? Will it be biodomes? Will it be underground? Like what will people actually see
Well,
when they're
there's a
moving
number of
around?
choices there. I mean, look, I think the very first basis will just be things like these tuna camp hab modules of Mars Direct, all landed in the same uh, 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 little
Mm,
area and then linked up with tunnels.
mm,
Okay. Then um, another thing that people could do is they could excavate, well, first of all, caverns could be pressurized, and they can be very large, by the way. Um, but beyond natural caverns, one can create caverns like the subway system.
mm,
Okay. Um, the and if you think about, well, New York subways are kind of grungy. Okay, there are nicer subway systems.
it's getting a little bit sketchy too. Like I literally I had to dodge a guy who was shadow boxing. Like he was literally just punching the air on the platform, but there was not a lot of room to walk. and he wasn't stopping anytime soon. So I literally had to like time his punches to walk by him quickly in order not to
Yeah,
get to
okay.
him.
But
It is what it is. It's the New York City subway. You see some sketchy shit.
all
So
right. But anyway, but look, if you think about interior structures, um, which could all be created underground, things comparable to the interiors of shopping malls, okay, which are designed to be congenial environments,
hmm,
right? Because people want you to go to their shopping mall, so they make it a nice place to go. Uh, and so when people have a mind to it, they can create indoor structures of very large size that are nice places to go.
hmm.
And that could all be created underground on Mars. Um, Now, beyond that, um, then there's surface domes. Now, it's difficult to build a surface dome more than about 100 meters in diameter because the way it works is the bigger something is, the thicker it has to be to contain a certain amount of pressure. Um, so surface domes 50 to 100 meters are doable things, um, and they could be erected. Another interesting idea is there are craters on Mars that are filled with ice.
Mm,
If you melt the water under the ice, which you can, for instance, if you have a nuclear reactor, it's a lot of waste heat. Could you used to? So now you got an ice-covered lake.
mm.
Okay, and you could put all kinds of structures in that lake, and even go swimming. It was scuba
Yeah,
gear.
dude, nice. You
Uh,
got a cold tub, cold
yeah.
plunge in the morning.
Well, yeah. Okay, but or another thing you could do is have put water. In other words, you don't actually create underground structures. You shield your structures by putting an artificial lake over them. You use that as your fish farm. Um, and so you look up through your transparent ceiling, you see fish swimming above you. They're providing you with shielding, they're providing you with food, and natural sunlight can even come down through it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
So there's different things you could do. Uh, but I think probably the majority of the indoor structures would be kind of like, well, shopping malls, airport terminals, and the more classy ones. In other words, once again, the Mars colonies that will outgrow the rest will be the ones that attract the most immigrants. So therefore, they will not only have to attend to having an attractive social system, they'll want to attend to have an attractive physical environment.
mm. In terms of getting the environment built. I actually wanted to go back to the political approach in JFK for a little bit because you were speaking about JFK and the speeches that he made back in the day, and I've seen uh, clips of the one he made at Rice University back in 1962 where he said we chose to go to the moon,
Yes.
and he got taken out before that, before we reached the moon, but he was, from what I understand, a an indispensable building block and a persona for the mission that ultimately brought the success of the Apollo landing on the moon. And you have a great quote in your book about the political approach, and I just wanted to read what you wrote. And you say that mapping the trajectory of a spacecraft is a relatively straightforward business bounded by only the laws of physics. Mapping the trajectory of an idea through a political system, on the other hand, can be a dicey business. So, to get us to the first manned mission where we're at least attempting it, what sort of leader and approach do you think we need? Like, will we need another JFK style leader? Will we need a completely different approach? Like, how do you see that
Well,
unfolding?
um, as I said earlier, the quality of political leadership today is greatly inferior to that of the 1960s. In other words, if you compare Trump or Biden to JFK, if you compare the current British Prime Minister to Winston Churchill, if you compare Macron to Charles de Gaulle, they come off as Lilliputians by comparison. So I'm less hopeful of another JFK coming along than I was when I first wrote Mars Direct. And when I wrote Mars Direct, I included it as only one of three possibilities. I think now the main possibility is that the entrepreneurs will provide leadership to the political class. That is, they won't do it alone. But for instance, let's take Musk, for example. Okay. And he's an example. He's not the end of the discussion. Here's Musk. He's working on getting Starship flying. I think Starship will be flying by 2024 to orbit. And if that is the reality, that is if in the year 2024, which is just 2 years away from now, or 1 year away from now, that there's these fully reusable rocket ships flying to orbit with 100-ton cargoes, the same payload as a Saturn V, but 3% the cost because they're reusable. Now, going to have somebody elected president in that year. And if this is the reality of the world of 2024, then he or she are going to turn to their advisors and say, look, here's this guy wants to send people to Mars. He's got the ships. If we got together with him, could we have people on Mars by the end of my second term? The answer is going to be, well, yeah. Well, will it cost $1 trillion? No, we could probably do it within NASA's existing budget because he has the main stuff, but there's a lot of other odds and ends that he doesn't have. He doesn't have the nuclear reactor, doesn't have the plant for making the propellant, doesn't have the Mars spacesuits, doesn't have the Mars vehicles. We could make all that stuff. We got together with him, we could do this. Have people on Mars by, 2032. Well, then why aren't we doing it? In other words, by making it feasible, he's going to make it sellable. In fact, he's going to make it sell itself. Now, Musk, as I said, could be the one. Or he could skate off the edge of the ice because he's a risk taker, as you can see. But in that case, it will take a little bit longer, but somebody else will pop in because he has demonstrated the model. He has demonstrated it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that was previously thought that only the governments of superpowers could do. And not only that, do them in 1/3 the time, 1/10 the cost, and even do things they had deemed impossible altogether. And so if he should fail, others will pick up that flag and it will happen. So I think we need the resources of government, but I think the leadership is going to have to come from the people.
Yeah, and like you said, the entrepreneurs will lead the political system, and Musk has been a huge part of that. Like the way that he's taken the lead with SpaceX and electric cars, like he's making the government interested. Like he's literally forcing their hand and saying, I'm doing this shit. Like you guys can help, like be a part of this, and we'll make some money together. We'll make some progress. Otherwise, you're gonna get left in the dust. And because of his failure, he is putting what's possible on the table. And who knows, like maybe he's kind of a wild card. Like he just buying Twitter, how do you even have the time for that? Like that's something that would be a full-time job on itself.
I think Twitter's a waste of his time. There was, look, why is Musk important? Because he's created things that wouldn't have happened without him being there. SpaceX, Tesla.
Yeah.
Twitter did happen without his involvement, and he may change it a bit. I think he probably will make it profitable, although I doubt profitable enough to be worth the $44 billion he spent on it. I think that was probably a bad business decision. But most importantly, I don't think anybody can really make Twitter decisively better because it's filled with people who are going to say all kinds of wackadoo things, and it is what it is, and it's a waste of his time.
Yeah,
It's something that existed before he came along, and it'll just soak up his time. My hope is he'll probably make it profitable enough that he can get rid of it, and he gets rid of it.
I'm for. I was for him buying Twitter and making it more autonomous for users and trying to make it a more, free thought environment. But the fact that he was also going to run Twitter on top of all the other things that he was doing, like I know he's in a lot of ways inhuman. Like I can't imagine keeping up the schedule he does. But even with his abilities and with Twitter, I was like, there's no fucking way that he's going to make this work. But he said that he's going to pass it off, and we'll see what happens. I hope that it becomes a better platform that's not such a dumpster fire. And if it does, that will only help the message of Mars space travel be, spread to other
Well,
people.
it is, but mostly Twitter is people taking shots at each other, and and it's just not worth his time. I mean, even let's grant that he could stipulate that he can improve Twitter. Is that what we need Elon Musk for?
Probably not. Probably, he should do what he decided to do and then delegate it to someone else. But who knows? Like, Twitter's such a wild card. Like, it's literally the Wild West. Maybe we need a platform like that. Maybe we don't, but it is what it is. I'm gonna take a quick bathroom break for a second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so one of the other things that uh people talk about, and this is something that's also popular when you look at space travel forums, or people just writing about pros and cons of colonizing Mars. People say that, like, we have too many problems on Earth that deserve our attention, like poverty, addiction, disease, and with all these things that are going to cost trillions of dollars to improve and to make people's lives better, how can we spend money on space travel and go to another place when we have all these problems here? So for people that have that sort of mentality,
Okay.
what do you say to those
Well, first
people?
of all, if we're talking about us spending it, then you're talking about the government
Gov
expenditure.
spending, us spending.
Okay, the government spends around 20 billion on NASA.
Hmm.
Okay, and only a tiny, well, very little of that on going to Mars, but we'll say 20 billion for NASA. It's like $4 trillion that they're spending altogether. So they're spending half of 1,000th of the budget on space as a whole. And that includes all kinds of things like weather satellites and other stuff that no one contests the value of. Okay. So if we were to talk about, even the part of the space program that's oriented towards um, uh, interplanetary stuff, maybe $4 billion compared to $4 trillion. Okay, it's 1/1000th of the budget.
Mm.
It's nothing, and the so we're not being stopped. On the other hand, however, the space program uh, motivates millions of young people to learn science
Mm.
and become scientists, engineers, doctors, medical researchers, inventors, technological entrepreneurs. These are the kind of people that move society forward. These are the kinds of people that provide the answers. We certainly didn't find the cure to COVID on the space station, but I'll bet anybody that the teams that did find the COVID vaccines included people that became biologists because they were excited about science by the space program.
Mm.
Okay. So by um, acting as a creator of intellectual capital, the space program is helping us solve all those problems. Now, there's another problem that you didn't mention, which I think is potentially the biggest problem of all, which is the threat that we're going to destroy each other. I think this is the main threat to humanity, I believe global warming is real. I do not believe it is a threat to humanity in the current century. It's going to be an inconvenience. But the thing that could really kill us is the same thing that almost killed us in the 20th century, which is this idea that there's only so much to go around, and so we have to take it from them, or we have to knock them out before they take it from us. And this is fundamentally the idea that caused the great catastrophes of the 20th century. That is the idea that could cause the destruction of civilization in the 21st century. And to me, that idea needs to be undermined. And the way to undermine it is to make it clear that it's not true that there's only so much to go around, because the Earth comes with an infinite sky.
Hmm. Yeah, and now with the dawn of nuclear weapons and the ability to, essentially wipe the Earth off the map through radiation and starvation of over a billion people with even just like a small scale nuclear war, that destruction becomes so much easier. And I've had a couple people on the podcast that work in nuclear proliferation or are nuclear scientists, and as part of the research for those episodes, I was looking up near nuclear incidents in the past that could have wiped us off the face of the earth and led to the death of humanity. And there's been like 9 accidents, which is crazy, like 9 near accidents of confusion, or kind of like a pissing contest of who's going to do it first. Like, we've been lucky up to this point to have not killed each other. And it seems like if we're going to get to Mars, that a priority that needs to be equally as important is nuclear proliferation treaties and kind of like the disarmament of nuclear conflict, or else
Well,
eventually something's going to
I
happen.
don't think it's going to be the treaties. It's in the mindset. Look, we had world wars before we had nuclear weapons. And we can have world wars after there are nuclear weapons and they're gone. And there are more dangerous weapons than nuclear weapons that can be created much easier right now, which are biological weapons. Um, the thing that threatens us are not so much the weapons as the mentality that, in other words, if people think that there's only so much to go around, so we're going to have to fight it out with them sooner or later, then by definition, to one side or the other, sooner is going to be better than later, and that's what drives to war. And the you know, uh, yeah, climate can change and it can be inconvenient, but it's not going to kill you next year.
Hmm.
Global war could kill you next year, or the year after that, or 5 years from now, or something. If we maintain this concept that we're in a pre-war situation,
Hmm.
and now it's not clear to me that the space program by itself can undermine that ideology. But Hitler said that the idea of perpetual plenty through scientific progress, he said it was a Jewish plot to undermine people's belief in the necessity for war.
Science was a
Now,
Jewish plot.
yeah, well, sure. But now it wasn't a Jewish plot, but it does undermine people's belief in the necessity for war. And
Hmm.
that's precisely why we need it.
Hmm. So
That is
you're saying
precisely.
if it's so science is a way to make progress without conquering, without wars. So if we have
Yeah, sure.
if we have progression through science, then Hitler doesn't need to take over all of
And
Europe.
it's the only way. I mean, look, once again, Hitler, Germany needs living space. Germany didn't need living space. Germany today is smaller than the Third Reich and has a bigger population and a vastly higher standard of living. Why? not because they succeeded in invading other countries and killing people so they could steal their cows. Okay, they did a lot of that, and they stole a lot of cows, and they killed a lot of people, and it didn't benefit their living standards at all. Okay, the way their standard of living went up was through the progress of science and technology, which has been a global project participated by the human race as a whole, including Germans, yes, certainly, but also numerous people, non-Germans, including notably people they were trying to exterminate. And had they been successful, they'd be much poorer today.
Mm. Yeah, it's like it's almost like an information disease when you convince yourself that the only way to expand and make progress is through conquering, and it phases out the other options that you can cooperate with other people. And I guess if you were to project that onto the present day with Mars and the conflicts going on, if you're someone like Putin who's thinking about, pressing that button and initiating nuclear war, you might think a little bit differently if Mars colonization was a realistic option in your mind. Like if you saw that this is actually going to happen and that you can actually have this as a goal, like that, it's very idealistic, but like it does change the way people think that like this is not just the only ball of resource floating in the center of not the center. Now I sound like I'm from like the 1200s. The Earth just floating in the universe. We're not just the only thing that exists with resources. That Mars is out there. This is also just the beginning.
Right.
That completely changes
Yeah.
your mindset.
Yeah. Now, you're not going to change Putin's mindset.
You could.
Okay. But, well, no, you won't. Okay. Because Putin is a criminal who needs to have a war of sorts.
But he's also selfish. Like he might want to get a patch.
Let me explain. He needs to have a situation of hostility with the West in order to maintain control at home. Okay, Western liberal ideas, and by liberal here I mean in the broad sense of the term of believing there should be such a thing as human rights, for example, and that sort of stuff, not necessarily in the restricted sense of the current American political dialogue. These ideas are extremely subversive to his power. But so he wants to create a hostile situation. But in order for him to sell it successfully to the Russian people, they have to have an underlying belief that there's ultimately a necessity for war. In other words, he's the one who's selling war. The question is, will people buy it? And if we can convince enough people that there is no necessity for war, and I mean, thinking more broadly, okay, this Russian situation is very dangerous, but I think it will be dealt with. If the West gives Ukraine sufficient arms, they can rebuff the invasion, and this one is going to be put on ice. But the bigger issue is the West and China. Okay, and this is something. This is a longer term situation, and it's not a problem that can be solved. It's a problem that has to be managed. And once again, if there's this underlying belief on both sides that the world isn't big enough for the two of us, the dynamic can only go to war. Okay, so by undermining that belief, it's a belief. It's not a reality. I mean, look, the world right now has 4 times the population it did when I was a kid, and yet the people almost everywhere are living considerably better than they were in the 1950s. And so we have 4 times the number of people, and yet a very considerable number of them are living much better than they did in those days. So it is not a zero-sum world. That is a falsehood. There's no reason why people should believe it, except it intuitively seems like it should be true, that there's only so much here. So if they have it, we can't have it. And what space does is it makes it tangible. I actually believe the resources of the earth are infinite.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. I believe the resources of the earth are infinite, because what is and what is not a resource is defined by technology. And the more people there are, the more inventors there are. And the more inventors there are, the more inventions there are. And inventions are cumulative. And the more inventions there are, the more combinations of inventions there can be. And what inventions basically are combinations of previous inventions. So the more inventions there are, the easier it is to invent more stuff. And this is why the human standard of living has gone up as the population has gone up, and not gone down, as Malthus said. But
so with invention, you can extrapolate a finite resource to become infinite through technology, you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, land was not a resource until people invented farming. Until people invented farming, land was just something you had to walk over in order to try to find the deer. The oil was not a resource till people invented oil drilling and refining and product machines that could run on the product. You know, if you went to Napoleon Bonaparte's general staff and they were thinking of invading a country and they were listing the natural resources of the country, they would never have listed oil. They wouldn't have thought of it. Aluminum would have been unknown to them, saying nothing of uranium. Deuterium, which is the fuel for fusion power. It's not a resource right now. It will be once we have fusion. Or even nuclear power has barely been exploited. Do you know? Okay. You see granite all over the place. Okay. You live in New York, there's granite in Central Park. Okay. There's granite rock formation. In New England, there's mountains of granite. Do you know that the average piece of granite contains 2 parts uranium and about 6 parts thorium in it?
No, I had no
Enough
idea.
that if you took a kilogram of granite, of rock, it has as much energy as 100 kilograms of oil.
No, I didn't know that.
You think about it. Those rocks in Central Park are boulders of energy. Okay? The mountains in New Hampshire are mountains of energy. Okay? And here's the other thing you see. When we went from the pre-industrial society to the industrial society, so we invented things like steam engines and steel and stuff like this. And that gave us the technology to invent things like electric power generators and electricity. And electricity allows you to create aluminum, which otherwise you can't make. And it takes electricity to make aluminum. And otherwise, it's not separable from aluminum oxide with thermal means. So each new scientific level creates new resources, and each new resources creates new capabilities. So the late medieval world was able to create the industrial revolution world of steam and steel. And that was able to create the world of electricity and chemistry and aluminum. And that was able to create the world of nuclear reactors and someday soon, probably in a historical sense anyway, a blink of an eye, fusion power. And who knows what that will make possible. When we have true spacefaring capabilities, we'll have giant astronomical observatories in space, dwarfing Hubble, dwarfing Webb, and they will make enormous discoveries of laws of physics, because many of our discoveries of physics has come from astronomy. And when we are because the universe is the best lab there is. It's the biggest. It disposes of the vast energies and so forth that you can't get in any other lab. And we could see into the processes involved in the creation of the universe. We're talking about understanding laws of physics that we don't fully understand right now. You understand new laws of physics, you gain vast new engineering capabilities. We understand aerodynamics and a bunch of other stuff. We can fly now. We fly, which would have seemed a miracle to people in the Middle Ages or even in the 1800s. We're having this video conversation right now across 2,000 miles. And if you were in China, we could be having this very same conversation.
Yeah, what's the saying? Any technology that's sufficiently advanced is magic.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's magic. But these technologies create the tools to make further discoveries.
Yeah.
Which therefore lead to. Okay, so once again, the resources of the earth are infinite. Okay, we don't, you use up some iron. You haven't actually destroyed any iron. You've just degraded it. If you have energy, you can put it back together again. But nevertheless, it's so long as we're confined to the earth, it seems intuitive that the resources must be finite. It's like to convince someone that the resources of the earth are infinite is like trying to convince a mathematically illiterate person that there's an infinite number of points in a line segment. It doesn't seem possible there could be an infinite number of points in a 1-inch long line segment, but in fact there are. However, anyone, even someone who's never studied mathematics, can understand that there would be an infinite number of points in a line that goes off forever in both directions. Okay, that they can see. And that's just it.
No.
To see is to understand. Seeing is understanding. And by going into space, we let people see that resources are infinite.
Yeah. We're already seeing some of these resources that could enrich life on Earth through space travel. My mom actually sent me this article the other day about manufacturing stem cells faster in space than we can do on Earth. This is from Cedars-Sinai. Microgravity has become of great interest to cell scientists due to unique properties it grants to biological tissues and processes that could potentially help mass produce cells or other products in a way that is not possible to do on Earth. And from what
that's very interesting. Please send me a link to that article.
Yeah, I will. And from what I understand in the article, they're pursuing building these stem cell labs in the space station because zero gravity for whatever reason. I mean, there's a reason for it. I just don't understand the full ramifications of it scientifically, but stem cells seem to grow faster in zero gravity than they do on Earth. And for whatever reason, they're more plentiful, and we can make organs and replacement stem cells for people faster. And that can become a huge resource. If you build that out and scale it, the implications for that are, saving millions, hundreds of millions of people's lives down the line. So that's something we know now that space travel could help enrich life on Earth, is that we can grow stem cells better in zero gravity. So it's like the idea that space is, just enriching the beyond Earth doesn't seem to be true. That there's already things we can see that are going to enrich, besides just the knowledge of people learning more about science, like actual applications that can make our lives better on Earth. So it's like, again, it goes against that scarcity mentality that the space travel and the living on Earth, like we can help grow each other.
Right.
If you had the chance to go on a very early Mars mission, would you do it?
Yes.
Would you go on the first one if you had the opportunity?
Yes.
You seem very confident.
Well, Um, you only live once.
YOLO.
Okay, and you don't live forever. So if I could have a chance to participate in that way, I certainly would.
Mm.
I don't think I will have that chance. I think we've waited too long for me. But if I had the chance, I would take it.
Something I was thinking about was if VR, like the growing reality of virtual reality and augmented reality, do you think that could undermine our chances of going to Mars? Like
No,
if we,
I don't. I think, well, at least as far as exploration is concerned, we can use VR to allow large numbers of people to participate in a limited way,
yeah,
but nevertheless participate alongside the astronauts. In fact, the Mars Society is working on demonstrating that. We have a practice Mars station in the desert, and we've now filmed the surrounding terrain with sufficient detail to make a VR simulacrum of the whole area. And this spring, we're going to do some demonstrations at some science museums where some people are going to be able to go VR alongside our crew members in the desert and explore along with
wow,
them. And in other words, we're trying to demonstrate a way to democratize space exploration using VR to give
mm,
people a chance to participate in a way that would be closed to them
that's
otherwise.
amazing. So if you entertain the dark side of VR for a second, like if people become so obsessed with living in a virtual reality that they're rarely present in, whatever this slice of reality is right now, do you think there's a path that we go down where people become so hyper obsessed with it that we eventually like we just put external
Any good
progress
thing,
we put our
any
external
good
progress on
thing,
hold?
any good thing can become addictive. You know, Cervantes wrote Don Quixote about a guy who was so into medieval fantasy novels that he couldn't live in the real world anymore.
Mm,
Okay. So this has been with us for a long time. Okay. When television came along, okay, there are people who just turned into vegetables watching TV all the time. And then the internet and video games and you name it. Okay. So, any, candy.
yeah.
um, okay. So, yeah, there'll probably be people who get messed up because they become addicted to VR.
Mm,
But that's true of anything that's
mm.
enjoyable.
In the book, you allude to the transfer of life between Mars and Earth.
Yeah.
Is it possible that life on Earth was seeded from Mars?
Yeah, it is. Um, it's unclear. Okay, look, a big mystery about life on Earth is that we don't see any examples of free living organisms more primitive than bacteria. And as primitive as they may seem to be, bacteria are actually very complex, very advanced things. And it's inconceivable that they were the first life. Okay.
Mm,
Just as it's inconceivable that this was the first machine.
mm,
Okay. Before this came along, there were laptop computers and desktop computers, and also, of course, telephones. And before that, there was glass and steel and lots of stuff, many inventions going back a long, long way before you got to this. Okay. And so bacteria really have the look of something that are immigrants.
mm.
Okay. Now, could they have come from Mars? Yes. Could they have come from outside of both Earth and Mars? Yes. Um, could they have come from Earth and they wiped out their more primitive ancestors? Yes. But that would be unusual because the pattern we see in nature of simpler forms in general persist alongside the more advanced forms. Okay? We may be descendant from animals that are like rodents, but they're still around, and in fact, they outnumber us. And they may be descended from fish, but the fish are still very much there. And fish may be descended from worms, but the worms are still there. And so it would be counterintuitive to argue that the bacteria don't appear to have ancestors on Earth because they wiped them out. Now, if we go to Mars and we find bacteria-like organisms alongside simpler organisms that sort of exemplify an evolutionary history prior to bacteria, that'd be strong proof that the life on Earth evolved on Mars and then was transferred here. Just like, look, you don't find any examples of genuine Western civilization buildings in the Americas more primitive than those from the Renaissance, because those were the first Europeans to come here. In other words, we don't find any Bronze Age buildings in the Americas. Okay, you find them in Europe because that's where Western civilization developed. Okay, if we could find the earlier stages of bacterial evolution on Mars, then that would show they came from there. Now, on the other hand, if we find no life on Mars, or if we find life on Mars, but it also starts with bacteria and nothing more primitive, that would suggest that both Earth and Mars were seeded from the outside.
So there's no definitive link between zero life and bacteria that we know on Earth, and bacteria is too complex to just appear out of nowhere. Like there should be evidence of something before.
Correct.
Okay. That's if we found evidence that we were essentially, born from Martian bacteria, like in terms of changing perspective and changing the story and like giving people a new outlook to unite us, like that would be crazy. Like that would be unbelievable to, like, on the front page of New York Times, like there's evidence to link us to coming from another planet. Like we aren't even of our own world initially, that there's something else. And yeah, I don't know, when I was reading that in the reading about it in the case for Mars, like that was like one of the, there's a lot of mind-blowing moments in the book, but just thinking about the ramifications of that, like going against the story that we've known for thousands of years, that could be something that would just completely shift the way people think. Like if bacteria could make it to Earth, millions of years later, billions of years later, we could certainly make it to Mars. If you think about it that way. Bacteria rode a rock. They rode a rock from Mars to Earth, possibly. Like
the rock riders.
Yeah, rock riders. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on aliens, and
all right, let's make this the last set of questions because I'm gonna have to go soon.
Okay, we'll do this quick. Aliens, and I'll ask you one more thing. But in the case of aliens, the Kepler telescope, from what I understand, like there's 300 million possible planets for life just in our galaxy. Is that correct?
I believe significantly more than that.
More than that?
More like 80 billion.
80 billion. All right, that's even more crazy. Like, so if you think about it like that, statistically, there must be something out there. So I think it's a more boring question to ask, do aliens exist? And a more interesting question may be, how do you anticipate that alien life would present itself? Like, do you have any ideas of what a first encounter may be like?
Okay. Well, first of all, I agree with you that there's almost certainly many, many, many alien civilizations in our galaxy. Um, Now, I believe we will detect life in other solar systems this decade.
Hmm.
I think we'll detect it with the Webb Space Telescope, and I'll tell you exactly how. They will detect oxygen in the atmosphere of an exoplanet. And I mean serious oxygen like we have on Earth, like 20% of the atmosphere or something,
And that's
not
something we haven't
trace
done yet.
oxygen.
That's something we haven't discovered.
No. But now you see, that would prove there would be life there because oxygen is incredibly chemically reactive, and the number of things it can react with far outnumber oxygen. For instance, hydrogen, carbon, iron, silicon. These are all very common things that all um, um, will, so that there can't be free oxygen except if there are things like plants that can break apart the compounds like carbon dioxide and water in which the oxygen is otherwise fixed. Okay, the so we will detect life in other solar systems this decade. Now, in terms of intelligent life, that's harder because, okay, you want to detect technological artifacts, um, uh, and the um, and they can be hard to anticipate because, I mean, like in the 1800s, Gauss said we should look for gas lights on Mars.
Mm.
Well, gas lights were a transitory technology. They were only popular for about a century and then they're gone. Okay. Uh, and some of the technologies that we use now, like radio and so forth, could very well be transitory technology. So that the people looking for radio signals could be looking for gas lights, basically. The Now, I wrote a paper. It's out there on the internet somewhere about artificial singularities. It basically creating artificial suns, which would be something that um, uh, would be of interest to a very advanced civilization if you can create artificial suns. The vast majority of our solar system, considered as real estate, is much too cold, right? I mean, beyond Mars, everything is really cold, and there's a lot more out there than there is in here. And in interstellar space, it's all very cold.
Mm.
Create artificial. Now, we don't know how to create artificial stars right now, except from the point of view of physics, one could outline how one might go about it. The Could such things be detected? There are certain things about them that I identify in the paper that would make them distinguishable from natural stars, and a search for such objects could be undertaken. But you'd want to look for artifacts, I think, that dispose of very large amounts of power, artificial stars, interstellar spaceship drives, things like this, that because they have to involve a great deal of power, could produce a signal that would be detectable. And unlike communications involves all sorts of conventions,
Mm.
right? Um, to uh, that you have to be wise to. In other words, are birds talking to each other? We don't know. We
There's
just hear the birds squawking,
some sort of
but
communication there, it seems.
we don't know. I mean, are they using words? Someone say,
Who knows?
"Oh, they're not. They're just birds." Well, do you know that? Who knows that? Okay. Uh, do you know? I don't know if you know this. Most people don't. If you see two squirrels on two trees, and if you see how they move their tails in very subtle ways, they're actually talking to each other. They're
Wow.
making signals with their tails. Uh, I observed this, and I had a hunch that this could be so, and then I went and researched it on the internet, and it turns out it's true. People have done research on this. Uh, but I was unaware of it until I saw this thing going on. It looked like something odd here. But the squirrels, they have a way they can move their tails in very subtle ways, and it actually is a form of signaling that they do.
Wow.
Okay, do dogs talk when they bark? I don't know. We've lived with them for 20,000 years. No one's ever decoded a word of dog language, but they're capable of complex vocalization and very acute hearing. Maybe they're talking. We don't know.
Well,
So,
there are many people in Brooklyn who speak to their dogs as if they believe they're understanding what they're saying. I can whether or not they're
there's that.
communicating, I can definitely tell you
Yeah,
that.
but when the dogs, when the fire alarm, used to be that the fire stations would fire their signals at noon every day, and all the dogs in the neighborhood would start barking. Are they saying anything? I don't know.
Hmm.
It's hard to decode alien languages, but a uh, uh, something that involves a great deal of energy, such as artificial suns or interstellar travel, might be detectable. We just have to figure out what it would look like.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the more fascinating things in the book is you were talking about the temperature of space and going off of like detecting things, it like actually having to induce global warming on Mars to create the greenhouse effect. I just thought that was really interesting because like on Earth, obviously global warming is a negative, and then to get to the next place and like no, we actually have to just like
Well,
nuke the
now
poles
that's an
basically.
interesting thing. One thing you might detect in an exoplanet that could reveal civilization is an artificial greenhouse gas,
Yeah.
so that they are trying to do global warming by putting, say, fluorocarbons in their atmosphere. If you could detect fluorocarbons in an atmosphere of a planet that has an oxygen atmosphere, you've detected an intelligent species that is
Mm,
doing terraforming of their planet.
mm. So
Hey, I'm going to have to go soon.
yes. Let's end off. I just wanted to ask you one quick question, just non-space, non-Mars related. I just like to do that just to close out. What's something you've done that would surprise even your closest friends? As you think about that, I'm gonna grab your book and I'll be right back because I want people to see it before we.
Well, I surprised my wife on our recent trip to Mongolia. Um, we went camping out in the Gobi with the Mongolian Mars Society in the morning.
Wow,
Everybody got up, they started doing archery, and they challenged me to join them. And I managed to hit the target dead on 100 meters away. She
really?
was kind of floored by that. And actually, I haven't pulled a bow in about over 50 years, but when I was a kid, I was good at archery. And so I surprised her with that one.
You hit a target from 100 meters away, a fucking football field. That is.
Yeah. Okay, maybe it wasn't quite, maybe 70 meters, but yeah,
I mean,
I
anything
did.
over 10 meters to me is like a mile shooting
Okay.
archery. I that's insane.
Yeah. I was actually kind of surprised too,
Is
if
this
you want to know.
what type I don't really know the types of bows specifically, but like there's the crossbow and then there's more like traditional bow. What
This was a more traditional bow. It was a compound bow.
compound bow? Okay.
Of Well, actually, they explained to me it wasn't. It was either a Mongol bow or a Manchu bow.
Hmm.
It was shorter than. Yeah, maybe it was a Mongol bow because they use a short bow. It's a regular bow that you pull, but it's not a long bow because they have to be. They want to be able to use it on a horse.
Are you typically the one who's taking the lead in like the adventurous aspect of the relationship, like going to Mongolia or planning trips, or is it like a
Well,
joint effort with you and your wife?
uh,
And and after this, we'll end
I
off. I
guess
know
I
you
take
gotta.
the lead. I got to take this call.
Okay.
Got to go. Good
Okay.
talking to you.
Can you leave the tab open? I'm gonna stop. You can. I'm gonna end it now.